Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond Talking Points. So, today we're going to talk about something that's kind of a hard turn from last week. On our last episode, we revisited historical topics and we talked about some of our observations and our research and some opinions that we thought we wanted to put out there because they might be a little out of the norm. And it would be interesting to kind of debate over it and see where we disagreed as far as we know. But on this one, I was pretty adamant that we talk about the recent events of January 6th and I guess what was the storming of the Capitol building, because I find it just interesting for a lot of reasons that we're going to delve into. So I was kind of insistent that we need to at least talk about some of my reactions, and then you can tell me your stance, and then we could just kind of talk it out. Because I figured worst case scenario, you take a very establishment stance, and then I might hear establishment counter arguments that I might not have, I guess, predicted. I thought that was the worst case scenario. And then then there's still the other universes where you give a nuanced view that might play into more of your unique views because you do kind of hate the establishment. And then we end up at a place that might be unexpected, at least in terms of some random thoughts. So I guess a brief overview. I'm sure everybody who's listening to this knows on, January 6th, there was a pro-Trump rally in Washington, D.C. And after Trump spoke, they went up to the Capitol building, and then slowly they took over the Capitol building. And then this all occurred while the legislators were voting to accept or reject certain electoral votes from states, or it's really when people were able to raise objections to the electoral votes in certain states. So all this occurs, the people in the Capitol building go on lockdown. People end up actually physically breaching the building. And then all kinds of stuff happens that is has various degrees of seriousness, from people literally defecating in the building in random places to people taking selfies in weird outfits at Nancy Pelosi's desk, to people stealing random stuff. And then there's and then every now and then you see a person who literally looks like he was ready to execute 30 people on the spot if given the opportunity. So you get this huge range of people, and the political reaction to it, I think, has been fascinating, because it's almost, from what I see, even as a person who dabbles in very anti-state, hardcore, ANCAP circles, a lot of what I was seeing was condemnation. So you see condemnation from all the mainstream right-wing figures that I follow. So everybody that's remotely similar to Ben Shapiro. Anybody who's Ben Shapiro to more mainstream has condemned this wildly. Everybody on the left obviously condemned it, acted like this was a terrible event that occurred. And then even the LP posted on Twitter a statement about how this is completely evil. So what I saw was, okay, everybody's condemning this, and generally for the same reasons. And generally, a lot of the reasons have hearkened to the importance of the Capitol building and our government institutions when it comes down to it, because it seems like a lot of the sentiments are going beyond it just being government property was attacked or invaded, but it goes to, this is the Capitol building, this is a sacred part of our democracy, and it's been breached, and that we can't use light words. This is treasonous, and we should talk about the people as such. And they've gone as far to label these people as domestic terrorists. So is that a good starting point, or should I go into more my reaction to that? I think this is a good time for you to jump in.
Alrighty, so to give the audience a little context, we were having a conversation over text last night, and I was I was quite unsure whether I actually wanted to have this conversation. And not because I was worried that I was going to be owned with facts and logic, but because it does seem to me to be one of those issues which is fairly black and white. And I was getting the sense that your perspective was so beyond, I guess, the mainstream, that I was thinking that we might not even be able to have an effective conversation. And the example I use would be you're speaking French and I'm speaking Italian. But generally, you're a good sport when I bring up topics you're a little concerned with. So I thought I should also be a good sport in the same regard. And this is kind of what the whole podcast is about. You and I have very divergent views on a lot of things, and we come together and to see if we can come to consensus or convince the other, or just have an interesting conversation that will make other people think. So it's hard to know, I guess, where to begin, because I could talk about, maybe I guess I could ask you. So, do you want do you want my topic or my comments to be specifically about the riot? Because I know you said you're not that interested in talking about Trump, but unfortunately, I think he's like the elephant in the room that I'm going to have to touch on again and again.
So
So is there, like, I just want to understand the parameters of the conversation before I give my uh, my opening take.
So I think the least interesting parts of the conversations are the motivations of the rioters and what Trump said and anything about Trump. I think the most fascinating parts by far has been the reactions to the riots. So I think when people have been talking about, what things these rioters believe and what their motivations were and the intentions of it and how this happened, I find way less interesting than the different people with wildly divergent views coming to the same consensus. That's the thing that strikes me the most.
Well, I don't suppose it's that. Well, I see your perspective, although I guess it doesn't surprise me that much, in the sense that both Republicans and Democrats, even though they disagree on I don't know, gay marriage or abortion or foreign policy, whatever you want to say, I mean, they're obviously two parties and they're not equivalent. Both of them do. Both of them don't want to see anything happening that could disrupt the general goings on of the state and the apparatus that has been put in place, that was put in place a couple hundred years ago and has been tweaked here and there. So, I mean, I don't know. I find it pretty, I guess I kind of expect it at some level to both Republicans and Democrats would condemn this, just because at some level it is the act was a sign that a lot of people felt as if the government was playing a trick on them. The government was screwing them over. The government is not your friend, and so they stormed the Capitol building as a gesture of, I know you're not that interested in how these people are thinking, but I guess I kind of interpreted it as a gesture of, screw the system. The system doesn't care about you or I. We're gonna show them what's what.
So what I find to add on to it, it's not just that it's been condemned, right? Because the only politically palatable thing is to condemn it. You can't be an acceptable discourse and a public official and not condemn it and expect to ever get reelected again. It's already been set to where it's like, no, that you can't have that opinion and you can't hold your job because that's disgraceful. It's the extent to which they're holding the views. So it's not just that these people were rioters or have done something wrong, and it's not just the everybody going, this is in the negative side. It's like these people, like you have Ben Shapiro on his show, and he says like these people should be tried to the fullest extent of the law, and I hope they rot in prison. That's like Ben Shapiro saying it. And it's like you have these people who have very low views of our public officials. You have our legislators are like the lowest approved bodies of government by far. And the second, none of the people who are actually legislators, like people that were legislating, were harmed. Some people were hurt in this whole process. Some people died in this whole process. But it was people we don't generally know the names of. There were some protesters and some cops. But none of the elected body was actually hurt. And you have all these people saying like, I hope these people end up on no-fly lists. You have people on Reddit talking about how they reported family members because they found out their family members were at the riots, and then that they were able to identify them. And it's pretty much people going like out and about like, yeah, all these people need to be put in cages for a really long time because of how uniquely disgraceful this event was. So it's not just that it's like, and I guess why I find this so interesting coming from some of the circles on the left is you when you talk about certain people like AOC doesn't really respect our government in the same way that like Nancy Pelosi does, because AOC is kind of like, you can get the vibe that she's disgusted with most of her fellow congresspeople, because she thinks she's like kind of, you can get the spirit of her being really like for the people she thinks she represents. So you have that kind of rhetoric come from like AOC, but then when people actually like get together and they mobilize and then they do something outright disruptive that destroys property, and they say like, hey, we hate you guys and we hate what you're doing and we think you're not representing us, it's like, all you guys should go to prison for a very long time and not be allowed to fly anymore, right? So it's kind of like this reaction where it's like, obviously it's easy for the left to be disgusted and dismissive of these people because they're right-wing conspiracy theorists. So if you actually ask them about policy, they probably don't really line up on anything, and they probably do believe wild things. But it's also like, these are people revolting against their government because they feel like their government has wronged them. And that's supposed to be like, being of the people is supposed to be a thing of the left. And then on the right, you have people who are supposed to be generally against how our government has become the way it is, even though they're institutionalists. And then they're here full on defending a public building, essentially, to a greater degree than they got outraged about any private building that was attacked in all the summer during riots, right? Because in the summer you had riots where whole buildings got completely burned down, and none of those people were labeled domestic terrorists, even if people said crazy things like Black Lives Matter should be thought of in that way. But they never actually said you need to use facial recognition to track all the BLM people and put them on no-fly lists. But that's kind of what's happening right now with this, siege on the Capitol building. So it's kind of like, I'm just finding it fascinating to the degree in which they think these people should be punished, even though I'm not surprised that they're all condemning it. And because they're all coming to this conclusion for somewhat different reasons, but in the end, they're all kind of citing democracy, but it's like a people's uprising of sorts, even if you and I both would agree it's for stupid reasons that are very likely completely unfounded, but it was still like an uprising of the people against the government to some extent, even if they were very incompetent. So it's being condemned in a way that, and not being represented in that way. They're being called domestic terrorists. I just find that like so odd in this time.
So, yeah, this is okay. So we're definitely getting into the weeds, and I'll do my best. This is kind of the part of the conversation which I'm a little anxious about, but I'll do my best to communicate as clearly as I can. So I remember seeing a tweet. I'm not on Twitter, but on Reddit, I saw a link to a tweet, one of Sam Harris's tweets. And I don't remember the full tweet, but he said something that kind of stuck with me ever since. He said something like, there's a difference between looting a banana republic and turning our country into a banana republic. Now, I'm not saying, obviously he's not saying, nor am I saying everyone should go out and loot a banana republic. But I do think, so I guess I disagree. I guess I disagree with you on two accounts. Well, you haven't even actually said what your opinion is on the rioters themselves. So we can get to that in a second. So I guess, again, I'm still, I see like the logic. I see your train of logic. I guess it just doesn't really surprise me because this is kind of how I see government working in a sense. I mean, of course, they're going to call them domestic terrorists. Like that's like if you rebel against the government, then yeah, you're going to be condemned. Not only are you going to be condemned, you're going to be labeled as a terrorist, a traitor. That's what governments do. And so I guess that's really the first place where we disagree. I don't see, and that's not even saying whether I agree or disagree with that, but I see the whole government's reaction to this is perfectly in alignment with what I would expect them. I think everyone from Mitch McConnell to Nancy Pelosi to AOC, everyone's acting as if like I gave them a script, as if I composed what they were going to say in their head, and I gave it to them, and they're just reading what I said they were going to say. So none of that is shocking to me whatsoever. It's only, at some level, it's only shocking if you're less cynical about the government, which you're not. So you'll have to flesh out a little bit more, perhaps, what you find so shocking about it.
Well,
And then we need to definitely
yeah.
get into our opinion on like the riot itself and whether, yeah.
So it's not that I think it's shocking. I just think it's like it's almost exposing, right? So it's one of those things where it's like I know all these people really highly value and think that like the Capitol building is sacred and whatnot, and I know that they're going to say whatever is the most politically palatable, and I know that the optics clearly could never be good to defend it. So I like all their reactions are predictable, but it's just like these like clear ways of framing the people versus the government seem to just expose things that are odd to me. And like the whole like being for the people, and it's like, well, this is the closest thing to being a people's like assault on government. And then but then of course they're classified as terrorists. And then in the 21st century we think of terrorists as people with bombs who want to mindlessly just kill Americans. But this wasn't targeted at Americans, right? I was never at risk. Even if I was there, I wouldn't have been at risk. It's like, no, it was targeted specifically at government officials they believe screwed them over. So it's like different than like mindless violence against a large building to get the highest body count possible. It was specifically like, I don't feel represented. I feel like I've been screwed by my government and I'm going to fight them. And it's like, whoa, you're using the words that are like similar to racists shooting up black people's churches or like trying to get high body counts like that. It just seems like it seems like the word choice is like inaccurate almost. So it's like, yeah, technically terrorists, they're fighting against the US government specifically, but we've reserved domestic terrorists for like the Las Vegas shooter who went out of his way to mow down as many people as he could at a concert, which is much different than like cops were killed because it was a mob. So it's like one shooter killing like 30 people versus a mob that killed 5 and mostly pooped on things and took pictures. And it's like, I don't want to downplay the seriousness of some of the people in the mob, but it's like labeling the whole act as domestic terrorism and a bunch of dozens and dozens of domestic terrorists is almost misleading when it's like other events of terrorism in the United States in like our lifetimes have been massive shootings of usually by one person or coordinated terrorist plots that have been aimed to kill, much more people. This was almost like a statement. And it was all optics led. And the issue I have with kind of, I guess, the banana republic take of it is clearly it looks terrible. Like you have all these people saying we looked like we were a South American country, a country that's like the democracies that we think need to be rehabilitated type. Like that's the visual of it. But at no point does it cross anybody's mind that the people who are inside that building, who were inside the building on January 6th, it never crossed any of your minds that if they even did kill our elected representatives, they would be the new ones. It's like, no, if they killed our whole government, the military would still show up and mow them down if it was serious enough. Like there was no chance that those people who walked in that day would stay our leaders, right? So it wasn't like there was no chance that it would be a real coup. At worst, it was going to be like some people who worked in that building that day could be severely harmed. That was kind of like the worst case outcome. So even if it's like, okay, well, worst case scenario, our Democrats would have gotten replaced with new Democrats that would have been probably nominated by the state houses that they came from, right? And that's probably what happened with the Republican. Even if all the people died, worst case scenario, if they all got zip tied, lined up and shot, that's what would have happened. There was no chance that those people would be our new leaders. So even like the worst case scenario terrorism event that could have happened based on breaching the Capitol, it wouldn't be a coup. These people weren't like signaling to people like trying to like overthrow the government. They literally just occupied the building for a couple hours after fighting and ending up hurting and killing cops, but they didn't like shoot a cop in the head. It was also like a cop gets hit in the head with a fire extinguisher and dies later. And I think there's a distinction there. It's not like somebody was walking with guns spraying at cops. It was mobs beat up cops and then cops later died from their injuries. I'm not making the moral case. I'm just saying you have to, that's actually relevant when we're talking about like if they were like a real coup threat. It's like that clearly wasn't the intent. So Sam Harris can say that. And it's like, sure, there is a difference between burning down a parking lot at a car dealership and people going and occupying the Capitol, but acting like it actually, could it upend our government for more than several hours is like pretty unrealistic. I mean, at most it would have been like, it could have delayed our government for months, but there was no outcome in that where we got a new government unless it was completely different minded people. So labeling them in such a way is just like, so extreme. And I think the reason why that labeling has caught on and not been seen as problematic or inaccurate is because of the institution kind of worship that I'm hearing from a lot of mainstream outlets, where people are talking about the sanctity of democracy, and that's like their word choice. And I've literally heard, the grounds of that building being called like cherished, and things that are like religious terms almost. So it's like this really odd, overtly, flowery language that's almost tying the United States government to like a religious figure that has been desecrated. That's why I think I texted you. Some of the people who are reacting to this, it's like they were churchgoers and they found out their church was literally desecrated. That's how people are reacting to this. And even coming from like Ben Shapiro, I just find that, so I almost find that surprising. And that's what really separates me from the neocons, where I realized I was so different from them, was how like even they think all these things are sacred and it's unholy to invade the Capitol building. So does that start to get into my, I guess, opinion on it a little bit, or it's more of, I guess, my observation. I guess that's not an argument, but that's just what I'm seeing everywhere. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I guess there's two aspects of this. One, I really don't like. I don't think it's very helpful. I hear this, like people make this argument a lot. Like, is it really is this really terrorism? Is that really terrorism? Could we really use the word terrorist? And it's, at the end of the day, it's like, it doesn't matter to me what word we're using. Like, I think you can make an argument that it was terrorism, but like, I'm not gonna die on that hill. If you don't want to use terrorism to describe that, that's fine. We can use a different word. So, and that just goes into, how people use language, how governments use language. So again, that's not. Yeah. So I guess that's enough said for that. So okay, now on to my opinion. Well, I cannot condone the actions of the rioters in any way whatsoever. It was atrocious. It was terrible. Now it was disorganized, so it didn't go anywhere. But I told you, I think Kyle Kalinske from Secular Talk described it as a diet coup, and that's the really only way I can describe it. A diet coup. Like people would. And I know I'm not a psychic. I can't read every single person's mind in that riot, but I'm, willing to bet a lot of money on the fact that the best case scenario for those people would have been to find a way to keep Trump in power and to prevent Joe Biden from ascending to the presidency. I mean, that was kind of the whole. That was kind of the state, the ideology, or that was the idea that was built into the whole statement itself. It's like, you robbed us, you robbed Trump of the election. You stole the election. Joe Biden isn't the legitimate winner. And so we're gonna do something about it. And again, it was disorganized. Nothing happened. Yes. But going back to why, like, another reason I was a little uneasy to talk about it is we don't know what the ramifications of it will be in the long term. In the short term, yeah, pretty much nothing's happened. Some people will be locked up behind bars for a really long time. But it's the fact that a certain group of people were so upset, so frustrated, that they were willing to attempt a coup. Whether it wasn't again, it's not successful. We all know that, but it was an attempted coup. It was, as well as a statement and a symbolic gesture. It was a kind of both at the same time. But it just goes to show just the weird place we're in as a country at some level. Because that's never happened in something like that. Really hasn't happened like for a couple hundred years probably. I mean, there was like the armed rebellion under Washington who squished that. So there have been like people doing direct action against the government and of course there was the Civil War, which is even a bigger kettle of fish, and we're not there yet, of course. But so, I mean, I think it is at some level, I think of it as a bad omen of what could happen in the near future. Because again, it's like these people, these Trump supporters, they truly feel like, I'm not saying like, I'm not saying it's cynical on their part. I don't think it's cynical at all. Most of these Trump supporters, they truly feel like Joe Biden is not legally the president of the United States, even though he is. So they believe everything they say, but that's a dangerous belief. And it's dangerous for the institutions. It's dangerous for really democracy itself. Even though we don't, even though our democracy is a very flawed democracy, of course. But I guess I'll just add one more quick point, which is, I think this is really like a symbol of kind of the chaos that has come about from someone like Trump being in office. And now, of course, the blame, like, it doesn't just go back to everything was peachy and then Trump came along and destroyed the place. It's like this, it's much more complicated than that. But I think we've gotten to a point where, people are willing to throw themselves behind a one person who is, claiming they're going to shake up the system and that everything's rigged against the average person. It's kind of similar. How would I put it? These examples that are coming up in the top of my head, they aren't really good examples, because these people aren't really the same as like Trump. But it just reminds me of like a Caesar or Napoleon, some one individual who kind of got a certain amount of popular support, who was, able to be thrust into power because of that popular support. Again, I'm not saying it's equivalent at all, but it is similar. And so this just reminds me of the fact that history is not over, and who knows what will happen in the future. But just looking at what has happened in the past in similar situations, it has not really been good in terms of people. It has not really been good if you are aiming for a more democratic form of government.
Got it. Well, so I guess there's two parts of kind of what you said there. There's the part that in my head I was kind of stuck on for a little bit, and I was going to try to interrupt, but I don't know if it's even going to be worth pursuing, so you can decide if it is in a little bit. But that's the idea of like, just you described, like, you said you didn't condone their actions and it was atrocious and whatnot. So there's one conversation of because of course the conversation that you're most afraid of happening, which I'm not going to force you to pursue, is me giving the moral justification for rioting against the Capitol. And I think that's, even though I don't agree with the people's motives, I don't really think anything. I personally don't think they did anything wrong. And we can go into that if you want to. I don't think I don't know if that's something you want to talk about, because it's going to reiterate a lot of stuff we've always talked about. And I think my stance is kind of simple on it. But I think so if we want to go down that road, we can, or we could detour there. The other side of it is, I guess, what it means in our outlook on it. And the outlook on it for me is, I guess to some extent, I'm optimistic now, for the same reason that you're pessimistic now, which is kind of like the same reason why if I listen to the Bulwark or listen to the Dispatch and they complain about Trump, I think I'm like, whoa, is Trump actually secretly awesome? Because you guys are making him sound so great, because all they do is they complain about how he's going to destroy our institutions. And I get all happy. I'm like, oh, Trump's doing that? I didn't notice what's going on. Um, and then that's why when you were texting me recently, we were talking about it, you feel like you've been too nice on Trump. And I think the reason why you think you've been too nice on Trump is the reason why I've been thinking like maybe I've been too hard on Trump, because maybe Trump's doing everything that I could have hoped for, which is maybe our institutions are going to decay now. And because truly the way I see things in the most like optimistic ideal version is it's people really start to realize how extremely polarized they are. And once you're aware of your extreme polarization, none of our government really makes sense once you realize you don't have anything in common with the people who are ruling over you. If people come to the terms with the fact that like the extreme Republican and the extreme Democrat don't really have anything in common beyond living both in the United States of America, and once they acknowledge that all of them want to force their vision on others and their visions are diametrically opposed, then we can work towards something, because we can acknowledge, okay, maybe it's silly that you have complete absolute power over me in all these spheres. Maybe we should work to diffuse that power. But until we get to that point, there's really no real progress in my mind to be made. And I think this is why I mentioned to you earlier, I don't think you've gotten the chance to listen to it, but Biden's inauguration speech is all about unity. And I'm kind of, as I'm listening to it, I'm hearing the news cycle tomorrow. And I'm hearing the news cycle from the boomer cons being, how dare Biden call for unity when everything he is pushing is clearly partisan, right? He announces 1.9 trillion in spending. He announces all these executive orders, but now he's calling for unity. Well, my reaction is a step beyond that. It's, why would you want unity with this person? Like, it's not even like that he's feigning unity. You shouldn't want unity with him. He wants to impose regulations on you that you are diametrically opposed to. He wants to outlaw things that you love. Like, it doesn't matter. You guys have nothing in common. So one of the beauties of this Capitol, being breached is you had all these people who are instantly disgusted with a huge sect of the right. So now they almost unpersoned those people on the right for having conspiratorial views. And once those people are beyond rehabilitation in the minds of the left, which they kind of have been for a while, and you're kind of hearing that even in the post-Trump world saying, well, almost half the country voted for Trump. So what are we going to do with them? And that's a question that Jordan Peterson asked Bill Maher on Bill Maher's show, a year or so back. He's like, you guys hate Trump, but a lot of people voted for him. So what are you going to do with those people? And what I'm just seeing is people. This may be an event that's increasingly, it's making people increasingly aware of polarization, and that's kind of the main issue I see with democracy. Is it seems pretty arbitrary to have 60 ruling 40 when they believe the exact opposite things on a ton of issues. So that's the reason why I'm optimistic coming out of it. So that's the takeaways part that I guess is why I was happy about the event. When I heard about it, I thought it was good news, and I still do think it's good news. So take that the direction you want to steer it.
I think I'll begin by kind of my overall take on it. If near the end we want to talk a little bit about, I guess, the morality of the matter, we can do that. But I'm less interested in that and more interested in, I guess, how thinking about it from a big picture perspective. And so I guess first I'll begin by explaining why I think I've been too easy on Trump. I think I've been too, well. Here's basically what was happening. At least in my mind, looking back on it now, I saw so many takes on him from liberals, from a lot of left leaning people. I just thought were cringe. I thought they were so terrible, and many of them were cringe and terrible. That's true. So I got into this habit, I guess, or I got into this mindset of being very skeptical of the left's portrayal of Trump, and so I was more willing to give him a pass in many situations, because I thought the left's take on him was just mind-bogglingly stupid. Or at least the establishment left's take on Trump was mind-bogglingly stupid. But the reason I think the riots were so terrible, I guess, coincides with why I think I was too easy on Trump. I underestimated the the chaos. I underestimated the damage he could do. I underestimated his role in the whole thing. I underestimated what people would be willing to do. Um, and I'm not here to say that I'm not here to say, oh, if you'd voted for Trump, you're a bad person and we should round you up and put you and send you to a Siberian labor camp. Obviously, there were reasons to vote for Trump, but those reasons, I think, ran themselves out as Trump became president. And what surprises me at the end of the day really is he basically didn't do a lot of what he said he was going to do. He did some of it, but he didn't drain the swamp. He didn't become an outsider, other than just the fact that he doesn't have good manners. He did all the establishment Republican. He was basically an establishment Republican president, is what he was. So it's like in 2016, yeah, I could give people a pass because of how terrible Hillary was. But after 4 years of seeing this man in office, my ability to give people a pass has greatly diminished. And because it's like, not only was he, was he an establishment Republican president, he was disruptive in different ways, in ways beyond just how disruptive establishment Republican policies are. I don't see. I mean, here's the thing. You mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that I'm not, that I can be very very anti-establishment, just like you can, and that's true. And I'm not so much condemning the actions of the rioters or saying I was too soft on Trump because I love the establishment. It's because I don't see us being in a place and time where, first off, obviously the ideas of the Trump supporters I vehemently disagree with and I think are wrongheaded and insane. But two, I don't see any good coming from turning the government upside down or just destroying the government or destroying all these institutions. So something does need to be done. But the way these people were doing it and their beliefs behind the beliefs they were doing it for, were both, from my perspective, morally and strategically, incomprehensible. So I don't know. I just want to make it clear how bothersome I did find, how much I disagree with you and how bothersome I did find the news when I heard about it. In the short term, and when it comes to someone, so I'll say one more quick thing. Joe Biden, of course, was inaugurated today. You owe me money, by the way. But anyway, Joe Biden became the new president of the United States. So it's like, in the short term, I guess that makes me a little bit optimistic. Not so much that because Joe Biden's a great person or he would be a great president, but just because because of Trump, because of my now, I'm stuttering. I'm optimistic in the short term because we got rid of Trump, even though I didn't vote for Biden. In the long term, of course, I'm not optimistic at all, because I do think. Here's the thing. I guess here's really what I'm trying to get at. It's like, at some level, yes, our institutions are crumbling, but it's concerning to me, I guess, at the level of I don't know what's going to happen on the other side. And I'm not sure I'm going to like what's going to happen on the other side. You think about all these different revolutions throughout history. And we mentioned this in our American history, or our episode on the American Revolution. Americans have a rosy view of revolution. A lot of revolutions, even if they're justified from a moral perspective, like the French Revolution was, and the Chinese Revolution was, and the Russian Revolution was, they were Cuban Revolution, they were all justified from a moral perspective, at least from my mind, because they were trying to replace a terrible system. And then they ended up creating a system which was, in some ways, worse than what that had preceded it. And so the fact that these Trump supporters were like invading the Capitol building, it's not the building itself that's alarming so much as it is a possible future for a possible change in the political structure, which would be even worse than what we have now. And now, of course, Trump isn't, he's not a fascist. Some people say Trump's a fascist. He's not a fascist. Someone described it to me well. They said something about he's kind of wearing fascist garb. So at some level, like, he doesn't even have a political platform. He doesn't even have a political philosophy. But what he seems to be picking up on is a certain populist right-wing worldview. That's kind of what he's adopted anyway. Whether he even believes it or knows what he's advocating for. Half the time, I think he's just talking just to talk. And so that's really what is most alarming to me, because it wouldn't be like, I don't know what that kind of future would be like, a populist right-wing government taking over, because it's not going to be like fascist Italy or fascist Germany. It's going to be something new. But I don't think that would be a good thing. Trump is kind of, he's taken on a lot of the let me put it to you like this, actually. Trump kind of represents like the worst aspects of the United States. And the fact that that could be like the future that America has, a Trump-like future, a Trumpian future, is alarming to me. Because it would be anti-democratic. It wouldn't be a lot of the values that I hold. It's just completely antithetical to those values. So I know that's a bit of a rant. I know I just threw a lot at you. But I thought some of that was very important for me to say on the podcast. So you can take it in pretty much whatever direction you want to.
Yeah, so I'll say a few things and try to be a little quick about it so we can get some more back and forth. So I kind of agree with you on the analysis of Trump. I think he was an establishment right Republican, which is why I voted for him the first time, is because I heard, oh, he's establishment and he's generally better on policy than Hillary Clinton, and he's just abrasive. I don't really care that he's abrasive, because that's not what he's going to do when he's in office. In terms of, like, I don't care about aesthetics. I just never have. It didn't matter to me. So all the norms Trump shattered, for the most part, have been aesthetic norms, or things that have just been like, it's like, oh, okay. So 10 years ago, if a president tried to pass something and then a court, the court kicked it back and said, you can't pass this legislation, it contradicts this, boom, your law is now held before, it's like held, you get an injunction until he rewrites it. Stuff like that happens, and it's like, oh, that's a huge embarrassment. And then Trump's like, I don't really care. We're just going to try to do this executive order, and if it doesn't work, we'll just change two things and try again. So there are all these things that are like norm breaking that I don't think are that important, but some people always saw those as attacks on democracy. A lot of the things that I've heard, I don't know. I guess I'm not that convinced that he was, but the one good thing takeaway for me is, for 4 years, if you said, I hate the president, I hope he dies, like 20% of people would agree with you. And you couldn't say that for a really long time. There was a really long time period, even with like Obama, where a ton of people hated Obama's guts, but it was like, I hate Obama. He's one of those communists. He's smart and conniving, right? But now we've had a president who is like a complete imbecile, who didn't have the same kind of Harvard background. So it was never, there were some people who think Trump's a genius, but everybody, even a ton of right wingers were like, he's just some blubbering fool. So I think he has permanently like denigrated the, the inherently respected position of president. And I think that's going to be good going into Joe Biden as president, because it's going to be able to have people like me make jokes about how Biden, is going to go up and try to talk for 20 minutes, but he's really just going to poop his pants and have Joe Biden walk him off stage casually, and none of the reporters will report on it. Like, I can make jokes like that now for the next 4 years, and Trump's part of it, and I can get away with it without even really having to qualify my statement, because people don't respect the presidency in the same way. So all that's awesome, and I'm cool with that. Now, the other thing I kind of want to talk about, though, is I don't think I buy your assumption that if anything changes, it has to change in a direction where one side kind of wins. So I don't see the breach on the Capitol and go, these people who, I don't see it as a battle of winner take all fascism. I see it as a sign of like, okay, here are people who literally think our rulers are corrupt and cronies and hate their guts. You have populations who feel that way about each other, and these are the representatives that elect them, and everybody hates their representatives generally. So it's like there's all this hate here, and there's all this power here. So like I know Michael Malice always calls for things that lead us in the direction towards a peaceful divorce. So it's not really saying the whole government necessarily abolished is like the track we're on, and it's not the government would be replaced with a new government. It could be something as simpler as, well, we know a ton of people who think a certain way live in certain states. We know a ton of people who think a certain way live in other states. How about we lean into that? Because this is all that's, because there's no good happening on the federal level. So it's like things like that could like potentially actually lead to like then a bad law from Biden could pass tomorrow, and then you might get a state do something crazy like actually try to nullify that law. Like something like that is now more on the table than it was like 10 years ago. State nullification is something that's like of certain federal laws has been something that's like not really happened lately. But as the presidency gets denigrated and the polarization increases, you're more likely to get something like Texas or Alabama just says, no, we don't care about that federal gun policy. We're going to do our own thing. And now I think those things are more likely to shift into the Overton window. So even if it's not like, oh yeah, we get anarchy tomorrow, it's like, no, I think we're more likely to not get one size fits all policies for everything in 5 years now. And at least, even though that's not my real aspiration, it's directionally correct, because then there will at least be states that say, okay, I don't care about that federal regulation, I'm not going to enforce it. So you have things like, okay, well, we're going to respect the federal government less and we're going to do our own thing. And that's fine, because more of us here think this way. And we don't respect people who don't think like us, and they can go live in their states and make their own rules. And as soon as you get that recognition, then I'm happier relative to our current system. So that's kind of like the outcome that I think is more likely. I'm not worried that the populist right is going to take back over after all this. If anything, I think the populist right has been tainted even further from the damage Trump's presidency has done to it. It's more of like the polarization is clearly hitting highs, which is crazy, because when Obama was president, they were already saying that. So and I think that's the good news. And I think that's the takeaway. And I think there are reasonable things that are unfortunately incremental, but I think they still strike in the favor of decentralization and generally less government in places that are more right-leaning. So that's why I'm more optimistic, I guess.
I don't really have that much to say about that second point, honestly. I mean, you could be right. I don't see decentralization happening anytime soon. It's possible. But I don't really have any opinion on that. So maybe we should shift to a different part of the discussion. I don't see I guess you'd have to walk me through the evidence. You can or cannot at your choosing, but I don't see the evidence of that happening anytime soon, really. I mean, I know there are people in Texas and California, and they make a lot of empty gestures, like, yeah, we're going to secede. We don't like the United States anymore. It's too liberal. It's too conservative, blah, 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 blah. I don't really see that popular resistance.
Well,
in the sense of secession. I mean, there was popular resistance
on the front
to
of nullification,
there was popular.
like, do you remember the sanctuary city thing? Like for all Trump's presidency, like that was states nullifying federal laws, right? Everything with sanctuary cities, where it's like, no, we don't respect the federal government's immigration policies in all these cities, right? So now it's okay that when the president, because Trump was president, it's okay to be like, F you. I don't like what you had to think. I mean, I don't like what you have to say. So you wanted to do these harsher, deportations. Well, our cities aren't going to hold people that ICE wants us to hold. And then you have places that aren't like handing over people that would get deported under federal law. So that's what I'm saying. It's just going to be an extensions of that. But now you have a Democrat power. And on day one, of course, the viral tweet I saw today was David Hogg saying, cool, now we can pass gun policy. And it's like, okay, well, now the options are there to do something similar. And I've heard right wingers a couple of years ago saying we should have sanctuary cities for guns, which is just saying like we should nullify federal gun policy. So it's shifted into the Overton window in some areas already. Like, hey, that's okay, and even for right wingers. So I guess that's my case towards that. If you're not interested in like thinking about that, that's fine. But I just wanted to add that example out there to show that it's not, I guess, completely unfounded. That's my forecast, or my hopeful, optimistic forecast.
No, I just don't really have any opinion when we're. I don't know if you're right. I don't know if you're wrong, and I'm agnostic on the issue. It doesn't really. I haven't really thought enough about it to have an opinion on it. I don't. I mean, I take your point. I'm just not sure that is going in the direction you think it might, or you hope it will, but it could. So.
Okay, so the other ways to go on this. Well, do you want to talk about unity? Because that's been the theme of the day. Is that something you're interested in having a little bit of a discourse on? Because that's been the tenor of the Biden administration today.
I mean, define how that conversation would go, because name me a politician that doesn't want unity.
Yeah, so the thing that bothers me is everybody on the right that has an IQ of 105 says the thing that like a slightly average intelligence person can say, which is like, hey, you're saying unity, but then you're pushing for things I don't like that you were pushing for 2 weeks ago and you hated me. But now you're pushing it in the name of unity. That's not cool. But as I cited the David Hogg quote, a minute ago, his tweet about how it's like time to take guns now, pretty much. I just don't understand why somebody would want unity, right? I guess that's the broad point I'm getting at, because unity doesn't mean what. Well, it's pretty much what you just said, right? So politicians will call for unity, but there's clearly no reason for me to want to unite with Joe Biden. Every policy Joe Biden supports is a policy that I think is abhorrent. I mean, even I think Ben Shapiro would agree with me on that. He would probably say that he finds all of Joe Biden's policies distasteful. So it's kind of like, why is unity held up as something that America should do? America should heal. America should unite. But it's for people who have agendas. So there's clearly no real reason to unite other than, I guess, except for pandering, I guess, and trying to have good optics. But like, I don't want to unite with Joe Biden, and I shouldn't want to. And if I wanted to unite with Joe Biden, actually knowing the policies he supports, then I'd be stupid to want to unite with him. Like, I think I reasonably, if you accept my premises, which you don't, that's not the point. But if you accept my premises on like how I think about issues, then I should hate Joe Biden's policies, and I should never want to remotely be considered united with him. Like, that'd be unreasonable. So when you hear the rhetoric, do you just think it's optics and there's nothing to it? Do you think there's something there? Do you think there actually should be like some sort of unity? Because it's not just that I'm cynical on it. I think that's actually an actively bad value.
I mean, I think it depends kind of from what lens we're looking at it. In the sense that, like, I think a distinction between, say, you and Ben Shapiro is, I don't get the sense Ben Shapiro, and correct me if I'm wrong, you know more about Ben Shapiro than I do, but I don't get the sense that Ben Shapiro is advocating for the Michael Malice type peaceful divorce or your type of non-peaceful divorce. Mike,
I would jump in to say that Ben Shapiro has pretty much said that if the Democrats try to make, if Democrats try to pack the Supreme Court and want to make DC and Puerto Rico a state, if they did that, then he actually would be for states seceding because he thinks that would break the pact of the union. But yeah, you're right. He isn't where I'm at, and he's not where Michael Malice is at all by any means. He's an institutionalist generally.
So, I think in terms, I guess what the way I think about unity, I guess, one wants to be united. I like, so the whole like governments, I guess, at some level exist on the level of or maybe I should rather say that if you think of government as or if you think about democracy, unity makes sense from the perspective of democracy. Although you could even say unity makes sense from the perspective of a country, of a nation state. So again, like Ben Shapiro, minus that comment you just said, and I don't know, some left-wing commentator, David Pakman. What do they both agree on at some level? Well, they both agree on they want to stay in the U.S. and they want to try to tweak the U.S. and tweak the U.S.'s policies to be a country to be their like ideal version of the United States. And so, I mean, I guess that's sort of really where unity comes in. It is if you want a nation, a country, a city state, a community, I guess you want a certain amount of unity, going back to something you hate, social contract theory and all that good stuff. But I mean, I don't really listen to or care about or read much into when politicians talk about unity, because they're talking about it, as you mentioned, they're talking about it purely at the level of optics. Joe Biden, when he talks about unity, it's because he wants to he wants to view himself as getting back to the status quo. And I'm sure he would at some level view Obama as a unifying figure and Bill Clinton as a unifying figure. He'd probably even be like George Bush as a unifying figure at some level. I mean, because they're all not Trump. So I mean that's just purely political mumbo jumbo. But I'm not willing to necessarily completely dismiss the idea of unity. But I just think about unity, or I think about it actually in terms of what it means on the ground, not just a political expression you should just put into speech a couple times to make yourself feel better and give yourself better PR.
Yeah, maybe this would be a time to like really talk to like if I could ask like, I don't know, like Biden a question if he was a mentally capable person, like that's something I'd ask him about, because I feel like I'm actually trying to give the whole unity credo more value than it deserves, because I feel like I've heard people who usually will every now and then have something valuable to say, like Eric Weinstein or Brett Weinstein. They'll kind of say things that are pro unity, and I just don't see it. But and I feel like I'm like really trying, and maybe that's why I'm just stuttering and kind of coming to the same conclusion no matter how I phrase it, because I guess in my mind I'm imagining like me and Joe Biden are standing here, and then we're like both 5 feet away from like like a ring, because you got to do the symbol of the ring, and we know whoever gets the ring gets to impose whatever they want on the other person. And me and Joe get to like stand like 5 feet away, 10 feet away from each other. The ring's in the middle, and we get to talk for like 2 minutes before it's whoever gets to break for the ring first gets it. And we're talking, and I'm like, and he's pretty much saying like, yeah, if I get the ring, I'm going to do all this stuff you don't like. And he's like, but we could be friends about it. And like that's like the only way I can read it, because it's like if I tell him everything I want to do with it, he tells me everything he wants to do, then the only logical reason is, oh, we want to use this for different things. I need you to be away from that ring by any means necessary. That's like the only logical thing. So any calls for like, no, I get to hold the ring, but I get to pat you on the head and sing kumbaya, like I can't read it in a way that's not that cynical. And I feel like there is some argument I've been hearing that I know you're not making. I just mean like I've been hearing in circles that's like trying to, like, I guess turn into a sacred thing, like unity and how we all need to just get behind this. But I just can't see it other than that cynical way. It's like, no, I get the ring and I'm still going to do what I want with it, but I need you to like agree with me that it's, you're behind it too, even though it's none of your values. So
I have something that might be able to help the conversation.
Okay, go for it.
So I don't mean to interrupt, but and we never did an episode on this, and it kind of died out anyway. So at some level, it's irrelevant. But you know what I'm talking about. Unity 2020. So Brett Weinstein, member of the intellectual dark web, he came up with the idea that, okay, like, so we have Biden and we have Trump, and they're both horrible candidates. You can't stand for either of them. Both of them are going to do horrible things in just different ways. So we need we need another option on the ballot that's will really, unify us and really fight for the people. And so I think eventually they chose Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw. I forget who was who, or who was vice president, who was president. But so I think it's interesting. I just thought I'd bring that up, and you can kind of respond to that, because that's Brett Weinstein's an evolutionary biologist, a former professor at Evergreen State University. So he's not a he's not a politician using unity for cynical reasons. He's using it in the sense that and again, in my sense, at least, in the sense of that's kind of what politics is about at some level. What would be your response to Brett Weinstein and that kind of use of the term unity?
Well, I think it's almost like it's almost like when the example I gave with me and Biden. It's almost like that cooperation he's trying to lay out is if Biden wasn't lying to me, like, and saying like, actually, no, I'm not totally going to screw you with this ring. Can you just pretend like I get to like you got to pretend like you don't mind, and we'll sing kumbaya, but I get the ring. It's like they wanted to split that baby, and you can't, and it never works in practice, and that's part of why it didn't catch on, because that idea is kind of like, or we both get the ring and we're really restrained about it, even though we have diametrically opposed views, maybe we can compromise. And what just ends up happening is, why would you vote for the compromise if you can vote for the person that's just the extreme one that you agree with? And I mean, it's like the polar opposite of Ted Cruz's philosophy that he laid out in his memoir that I feel like I listened to an audiobook like 5 years ago. It's terrible. Don't ever listen to Ted Cruz's memoir. But he was the first person I ever heard say this very obvious point, which is kind of like, why be the Diet Coke, right? So you're in the Republican primary. Why be the Diet Coke? You might as well be, it's like if somebody likes Coke and there's 5 people who are going to run as Coke, like, why would you show up and be like, no, don't worry, guys, I'm Diet Coke? And the person's just like, no, I don't want Diet Coke. So, and that's why I think Bernie Sanders was so successful in 2016, because Bernie Sanders showed up and he's like, oh, everybody here is Diet Pepsi. I'm actually Pepsi, guys. And then a bunch of people still voted for Hillary anyways, but Bernie like almost won somehow. And it's like, oh yeah, it's because if you have like there's just no reason to ever put Jeb Bush up there against Hillary, because the conservatives don't want Jeb Bush. They want Ted Cruz. And nobody's going to go, oh no, Ted Cruz is too much, I'm going to vote for Hillary instead. It's like, no, you're just going to take that side. So yeah, so that's why unity won't work. And that's the whole problem with, I guess, the ring of power. And that's kind of why I know we haven't touched on this very much, and this is probably a broad topic that actually would have been good for an episode if I thought of it, and maybe we will touch on. But it's like, I used to essentially defend the Constitution, and I would not defend the Constitution at any time anymore. And I guess one of the main reasons being is because I think the Constitution is what got us here. Because the Constitution was in such like a vague way that could be read in such. So it's kind of like the Constitution was written as if people wouldn't try to take advantage of it. So it's almost like you could compromise and say, here's the small government Bible, to take it and apply by it, but it gives all these windows. So it's kind of like that. That's the same reason why nobody's ever going to vote for a unity compromise ticket. Because it's like, well, you have this document and it has a spot we can exploit. And we do all want the agenda that we can kind of argue for based on this kind of loophole. So we're going to use the Commerce Clause. And it's like, you got to expect people to use the Commerce Clause. That's the Constitution's fault. So that's how I feel about all the levers of power. And that's the same reason why unity as a party wouldn't work. There's no reason to split the baby. You don't have a good incentive to. You would never vote for unity, right? You just vote for the person on the left. Why would you vote for the left winger with the right winger if you could just vote for the left winger? It's stupid. So yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because we didn't get a chance to talk about that, and it's I think it's hilarious. And then they got censored from Facebook too, anyways. So just because.
Yeah, no, it was well, I know this episode's not about Unity 2020. It's about the insurrection, or about what happened. I guess we're calling it the insurrection. But yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. When I first heard about Unity 2020, I was like, that's like, I wasn't necessarily completely opposed to it in the sense that like, well, I guess I can kind of see his perspective. I mean, I guess he's giving us a third, or he would be attempting to give us a third option. And if you really hate both options, it's like, well, I guess I could see that. But at the end of the day, I did think it was more. I thought it was sort of like Brett Weinstein kind of venting his frustrations. I mean, understandable frustrations, but still, it was kind of like, well, I'm frustrated with the government, so I'm going to pretend like I'm gonna found this party or found this ticket, and I'm gonna pretend like it's gonna revolutionize the world. And I remember reading their the little article or whatever. Someone who, I don't know who wrote it, but
it was like a mission statement.
The mission statement, yeah, and it was kind of funny because it was like, oh my God, if Unity 2020 doesn't work, the world is going to come to an end, guys. Like this is serious business. Like you have to vote for us or it's the end of the world, it's kind of funny at some level. Cause it's like, I mean, I going back to what I said, I mean, yeah, I think this system, something might happen to where this system will stop functioning in greater ways than it's having trouble functioning now. But on the other hand, it's like, that's what every political party ever has said. The Democrats and the Republicans would be like, yeah, you vote for this other guy, the end of the world's going to happen. So yes, I would not vote for Unity 2020.
So do we want to do a quick back and forth on something that brings it back to the main topics that I think is, I guess, worth exploring? And I think my insurrection thoughts would be incomplete without this, because I think it has like one, I guess, slightly unique point that I would make that I find particularly visceral. Okay. So, well, one thing I saw going around like Twitter, and this is like immediately following the insurrection, is like conservatives condemned the BLM riots, but they won't condemn this. And like, obviously the conservatives pretty much did come out and condemn it right after, but that's not the point. It was kind of like the law and order people are doing this. Why is one okay and one not okay? And I had to think about this because at the time of the BLM like riots, when those occurred, I live in a big city, and I was actually propositioned to attend one at one point, and I had to like think about why I didn't want to go to it, right? And because here's the thing, like I don't like cops. I don't like the government enforcement of laws. So like, even though I don't buy into the BLM narrative at all, and like that's a whole separate discussion we can have because I know you're more sympathetic to their narrative, I'm not sympathetic to really anything BLM pushes other than cops suck. But in general, I don't think their arguments about cops being uniquely racist, I don't find that compelling. But in the end, it's like, well, regardless of the validity of their claims, I still hate cops, and in general, they're protesting against cops. So is this a worthwhile cause? And in the end, because in the end, I was fine with the BLM riots, even when they were having violence against cops, up until they just start burning down, stores. And like where I live, they totally just decimated like a Target and a Macy's and stole a bunch of their stuff. And I'm like, okay, I have a problem with this because I only agree with you guys to the extent that you hate cops because cops are fascists. And I'm like, I agree with you guys there. But then there are people who are co-opting you guys to look bad, and then they're using the message as an excuse to hate on capitalism. So I don't really agree with your enemy even anymore. Now, so we take that point. Then we take the insurrection at the Capitol. Well, frankly, I have no positive feelings towards any person who works in that building. I don't value the property that they destroyed, and I don't value the institution they desecrated. So, and I think that the legislative body that was mostly unharmed, I think all of those people have specifically passed laws that have been pushed onto people who do not consent to them. So I think they're I know you wouldn't agree with this, but in my course of action, if somebody, is getting stolen, having their money stolen from them every week, you're not obligated to sit there and take it. You're not obligated to keep getting stolen from. So if you use that as recourse, then I think that's good enough justification. Now, unfortunately, these people weren't using that as their justification. They were often using a conspiracy theory as their justification. So it's like, fine, I don't think they were really morally, I don't think they were as morally abdicated, because I think the reason they did it is kind of like unrelated. But I feel only ill will towards the people who are harmed. So for that reason, I take it as almost like a win for my team just sitting on the sidelines. I wouldn't get involved for so many reasons. So if anybody in the CIA is listening and building a file on me, I would not touch one of those events with a 10-foot pole. But I think every person who is harmed from it, I'm not gonna say that. But if you think you know where I was going, I would have said it. I'm just not gonna say it out loud. But I think all the people who had anything bad to happen to them, essentially, in theory, I think they deserved it. So I don't feel bad for them. Now, the issue I have is the way that it's the intense visceral reaction to. It's one of those situations where I feel like the overlords dropped their mask. So it's like, yeah, people rioted. Okay, they destroyed some property. All that is money. It was just private people, whatever. So that's like the commentary on the BLM riots, right? It's like, oh, well, that car dealership got burned down. It was one place. Get over it. That's how some of these people sneer at you when you point out stuff that actually happens to a random citizen. But then the second, it's Nancy Pelosi being like, somebody stole my gavel and knocked over my office and messed it up. It's like, oh, that person. Even Ben Shapiro's like, yeah, that person, throw him in prison forever. And I don't think that's reasonable at all. I think that's like the most. I think they have like this huge, like, all of a sudden now it's their problem. So since it's their problem, they can actually get offended when it just happens to normal people all the time. When random people get shot and killed by like gangs in inner cities and stuff, it's like, okay, but that happens all the time, right? But then it's like the second you got on the government's toes, they're like, oh my God, this is the most disgusting thing that happened ever. This is a mark on American history, and this will be in textbooks, and it will be in textbooks, and it will be in textbooks. But nobody's going to write about the car dealership from the BLM rallies in textbooks. Right. So it's like, oh, yeah, things matter once they happen to the government. And this is, to me, a very stark reminder of they care once you're in their face, and they kind of might pay lip service, maybe, if it's not in their face, but they don't really care, or a lot of them don't. So thinking that the government really cares about like random people who have their livelihoods destroyed, it's kind of farcical to me. And a lot of today, like, not today, but reflecting on these events in general, has gone back and forth from like being disgusted with the reactions to only caring in certain circumstances to almost laughing, because it's like, it's kind of all a farce. It's like, yeah, of course they didn't care, right? Of course they only paid lip service to it when private businesses are destroyed. Of course they don't. They only pay lip service to things when like they take away your rights for the greater good. It's like, yeah, but you're supposed to do that. But then it's like, oh, but somebody was unhappy and broke a bunch of your windows and put you guys at risk, and you had to lock down. It's like, oh, this is the worst event that's happened in years, without a doubt. So I think that double standard is like, I don't know. I mean, I guess this is kind of why I said at the beginning of the show, But I just wanted to reiterate, that's the line of thinking that gets me to my level of disgust, is comparing it to the assaults on private property and just private livelihoods. The word property is like, it's redundant. It's people's livelihoods, where they live. Their homes were desecrated, but it's like, oh, we care because people who work in this office and often do corrupt things that, enrich themselves. Oh, those people got their offices desecrated and were scared for 2 hours. It's like, I don't feel bad for you. And I don't think people should feel bad for them. So you can vigorously disagree with that and absolve yourself in the eyes of the CIA now. And I'll be the one on the watch list, and I'm okay with that. So I'll let you, talk about that, and then we can wrap up. But that's, yeah. I don't expect you to agree remotely with what I just said.
So, at some level, then, like, I'm this is me purely thinking out loud. I really haven't thought about this before, but at some level, then I almost wonder if you have to, or of course, the other day I was talking about how maybe consistency isn't really something to want in the first place. But if one's trying to be logically consistent, then I wonder if it has to be a situation where you either like both, looting banana republics and invading Capitol buildings, or if you dislike both. Well, I know you disagree with that. I'm just thinking,
and it's because one's public property that's like, confiscated, and it's essentially, in my mind, self-defense, right?
Yes. What I'm really trying to get at, though, then is I think the way we should really think about I think both things, the invasion of the Capitol and the Black Lives Matter riots and looting and whatnot. And I don't personally have anything against putting people in jail for both things, actually. But like, you can't just do that. You can't just throw someone in a cage. You can't just throw someone behind bars for looting a banana republic or for invading the Capitol building and do not and then forget about it for the rest of your life. You have to think to yourself, well, okay, why did they loot a banana republic, or why did they invade the Capitol building? And that's not even necessarily a defense of either, or that's not even necessarily me criticizing either. But it is me wanting to understand the internal logic that people are using, and how that internal logic led to them acting a certain way. So I think it. While I cannot cannot condone the what the Trump rioters did on January 6th. I want to understand why they did it, and I want to understand what we can do in the future as a community, or what the individual can do, for that matter, within the broader community, in order to maybe alleviate some of the woes that are going on. Now, though, I think really at the end of the day, though, I really doubt that a lot of the. I think that people probably can overplay this thing about, like, poor Trump supporters are invading the Capitol because they're poor. I think a lot of it did go back to their conspiracy theories and the Trumpian ideology, however you want to define that. So that at some level really is, if I distinguish myself, or if I'm more harsh on the Trump rioters and less harsh on the BLM rioters, I think it is because I think their justifications or their reasons for doing it, I think are they're not the same, they're not equal. Which kind of contradicts what I was saying.
Can I chime in on
earlier.
that a little bit? Because I think there's something really funny, to me at least. It's funny to me. As you're saying that, I'm like, oh, well, maybe that's why I haven't thought about this specific thing that hard. And it's because I think both of them are essentially spewing very, very different narratives. But I think both their narratives are ultimately very wrong, very ideological, and have a hint of truth in both of them, which is why they can catch on in the first place. So it's like, maybe that's why I'm not harsh on either of them for their motives, and I'm more thinking about the enemies, because I think they're both so misguided that it's almost like, yeah, they were both wrong about it. So I'd be willing to be consistent if I was, I guess, concerning myself in that way. But it's because I think they're both like really, really wrong about their narratives, and they both have something right about their narratives. But overall, it's not, and that's what leads them to where they're at. And that's why I'm slow to condemn political violence in general, though, because I'm okay with political violence if you make the case that I'm willing to make, right? If somebody's stealing from you your whole life and then you fight back, I'm never going to get mad at you. And that's pretty similar to the arguments for the founding of the nation. It's similar. It's not the same because they wanted representation and not just to stop being stolen from. But it's like I'm okay with political violence in that situation because it makes sense and you can morally justify it. I think the issue with these two is you morally justified it. Well, I think if you're looking at intention and not just who the villains were in their stories and who is okay to fight for my worldview, I guess roundabout saying, way of saying I'm slow to condemn political violence because there are very valid reasons for it, and I don't think I see BLM and the crazy rioters as that different because I think they both had very flawed reasoning and justifications. So in the end, I focus on their enemies to see if I can justify either of them, and I can only justify the insurrection on the grounds of who their enemies were.
That's where we disagree completely.
Yeah, exactly, and it's because you don't think the government's the enemy in the same way. You don't think it in the same way that I do, even if you will say in certain circumstances they are. I think they're pretty much always the enemy, which is where we really that's where we really come apart. But I think that it did help bring together, I guess, what I've been kind of spinning around. But I think that tied up a lot of what I was getting at. And it allowed me to get the attack on people who say political violence is never okay, because it's like, I don't know, if you can make an actual good argument, then it's fine. And then they say something like, yeah, but your argument's not compelling to other people. And it's like, yeah, but that's the whole point of like trying to find truth, right? So people are going to disagree all the time, and then you have to suss out which ones are bad justifications and which one are good. That's the whole pursuit, and that's why we discuss things, right? So yeah, sorry for totally derailing what you were saying.
Yeah, well, I think, okay, I got to work my way back to where I was in the first place. I've already forgotten what I was saying. But I think it had something to do with, oh yeah, I think I remember the general area I was in. So let me, okay, I guess I think I can put it to you like this, or I can square the circle like this. I cannot condone or agree with the rioters, the Trump rioters. But I think when I was talking about like understanding people's woes or understanding people's troubles, I think that comes down to not people who invaded the Capitol, but people who supported Trump and people who voted for Trump. I think the people who invaded the Capitol were just the extreme. We're just the Trump supporters on the extreme end of the spectrum. And again, those people are more fueled by conspiracy theories, I think, and an ideology that's rotten to the core. But then I think about some people I know in my personal life who are very, I respect them and I like them, and I think they're good people, but they voted for Trump, and I have to think to myself, well, why did they vote for Trump in the first place? So that's, I think, where like empathy comes in, and that's where I think some self-reflection comes in, and that is also, I think, true for the BLM rioting and looting. I don't think rioting and looting really does much at the end of the day. I don't think it really I don't think it really changes much in the political sphere on average. It might disrupt a city or a state for a little while, but in terms of like actually doing something to change the system, it's probably ineffective. So in that sense, I would criticize it. But again, it's like, well, looking at the people who are doing that, or just looking at Black Lives Matter as a movement, like thinking about why they came about in the first place, and whether they're critiques of the system or whether their grievances hold any water whatsoever. And so, yeah, I would say that the grievances made by Black Lives Matter protesters, I think, are far more relevant than the grievances made by the Trump protesters. But I do think some grievances made by Trump supporters in general, or just people who voted for Trump, who might not call themselves supporters, but they voted for him for certain reasons. I think those are legitimate, which I guess goes back to to wrap up another point, why I was soft on Trump, or why I wasn't as critical of him as I could have been. I wanted to. I didn't want to forget that that there was a reason that Trump was able to do what he did, that preceded him, and I didn't want to forget the establishment's role in allowing him to come to power. So if I like have to justify my being soft on him in after the fact, that was my justification. But I do think I do hold that I was still too soft on him. So I think that pretty much touches the kind of the main points I was making this entire episode.
Yeah, and I have so many thoughts on, I guess, political tactics and tenor and tone of what to pursue. But we've been going for a while on this, and I think we got most of the thoughts out we were looking to get out on the topic. And I'm glad we were able to talk about this. Obviously, if I said anything more, I'd probably get a knock on my door soon. So I'm not going to incriminate myself too far. I kind of want to say so. I guess the only thing I just want to throw out is I used to be more critical of BLM and be like, oh, they're so stupid. How can you make anybody like you if you guys are blocking freeways? And then it's kind of like, well, maybe the point isn't to get consensus. That might not be the admiral end goal, because if you live in Portland and you actually can like make the mayor scared, even though he's already a lefty like you, if you can scare him, then that will push him over further left, right? So maybe it's not always about getting popular will, and we have to remember there's multiple avenues that people want to push their agendas, and it's not always that, because that's why I used to get so upset by that. And it's not, but it's just not always about consensus building. If you can mobilize a small group of people, that's all you need. Sometimes
I think it's an important point to mention, just near the as we're wrapping up the show. But it's like I stole this quote from Christopher Hitchens, who said, like, politics is divisive by definition. And I like, whether you like Christopher Hitchens or not, it's a different question. Like, that particular statement he said, I think, is dead on the money, because again, it goes back to how politicians use unity, or use the term unity just for purely cynical and opportunistic and reasons to further their career. But it's like politics basically, I guess, is the art, or whatever you want to call it, the science of, or the way that you kind of get stuff done in a broader context, or in a how people get stuff done at a broad scale. So like, you and I can exchange, or like I can ask you to, paint my room, and you can do that, and I can give you money, and that's a particular kind of transaction. But if we're talking about transactions at a larger scale, or if we're thinking about communities at large, it's like you have to, that's kind of where politics comes in. But
you had me at the quote and you lost me after the quote. I'll say that.
Well, let me see if I can get you back. So, okay, let me think about it from an ANCAP perspective for a second, or I'll use anarcho-capitalism as an example. An ANCAP wants to be in a place, let's call it a city state, wants to be in a city state where the people don't violate the non-aggression principle, and people are, free trade is allowed, and people opening businesses is allowed. And if you want to hire someone for a certain wage, you're allowed to do that. Voluntary mutual agreements and mutual transactions and whatnot. But that's politics. It might not be politics in the sense that you have, in the sense, at least from in the ideal, or at least what anarcho-capitalists are advocating for. There isn't a government, but you have you can have politics without a government. I mean, there's politics in ancient Athens, but there was no government in the sense that like the government as we know it. The government in like France or Canada or the United States or something. There was no government in Athens or Sparta, but there was politics. So politics is just how to deal with broader questions, how to deal with like human relations at a broader scale. And that's what anyone, socialists, fascists, ANCAPs, Democrats, or liberals, conservatives, they all think that their ideology or their political philosophy will solve the problem of human relations at a grand scale. And you can criticize the use of the term community, but I don't think you can get away from politics. And so that I don't know if I got you back or not, but that is my defense of the quote and what I said.
Yeah, I don't know if Christopher Hitchens used that quote in the context you described, because I think there's like a cool way to take that quote and then use it to explain why politics is about why, to go back to the example of me and Joe Biden with the ring of power in the middle, why politics is the ring of power and why the ring of power is inherently divisive.
Oh, that's not necessarily true though.
Well, I think the ring of power is inherently divisive no matter what.
No. I mean to say that quote doesn't necessarily defend the ring of power.
Oh, I mean, well, if somebody said politics is inherently divisive, then I'd be like, well, yeah, because the ring of power is inherently divisive, and that's why you can never work with the one ring of power. And that's why you got to let everybody only have control in their own sphere, and then you can choose what spheres you want to interact with. But that's aside the point. We already argued about a arguably monumental event, an event that I find not very noteworthy, that is going to be in all the history books, and we argued a little bit about if that's justified. We can talk about the meaning of politics another time when we're not an hour and 15 minutes deep into debating other things, because then we're going to get side railed and we're going to want to talk for 30 minutes. And then it's like, dude, why did we just drop this 2-hour episode where the last 40 minutes are unrelated? I feel like we are rapidly nearing a conversation that would do that. Because if you bring up, if you lay out a scenario about Ancapistan and you miss the slight nuance, it's like, dude, we got to go down a 15-minute rabbit hole to unpack that. So that's what you're asking for right now. And I reject that proposal. Not today, maybe next week. So on that note of me being divisive right there, to choose a word, we're going to wrap up on this one. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing us to have both decent takes and terrible takes in my situation. I'm obviously the one who has terrible takes, because those are the ones that the government will round you up and put you in a cage for if you say it too loud. So hopefully we get enough viewers so I get a bad call and then I get I could see myself getting pulled off Twitter for some things I tweeted earlier, and they weren't even that bad, but I was like, oh, maybe that could get me pulled off. So I'm hedging by saying this on podcast, because it's harder for them to censor, because then they'd have to listen to us in full. So hopefully we'll skip another week.
I'm much more careful than you. The more radical statements I make in private, between like face to face. Like I don't, I when it comes to podcasts or text messages or phone calls, I'm very careful what I say. But like if we ever do like an in-person, I guess not an episode, but if we were ever like met in person and having a conversation, I would probably say much more radical things. So
I think I've accepted the ethos that kind of goes with my ideas, that it's not just that I hate the government, but it's that I have to be willing to say, like, publicly, loudly, as loud as I can, that I think they deserve everything bad coming towards them. And I think, I was inspired by, the most conservative figures like Jordan Peterson. You have to say the truth. And I think the truth is those people, deserve to be pushed up against the wall, just like the Bolsheviks would have. So I need to make sure everybody knows that. So you have plausible deniability on all that front, and I will openly say it so the CIA can take me, and you can always gloat. You can be like, dude, I agreed with this dude, but I wouldn't say it out loud. So I'm alive and he's not. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed. Check out the backlog. You can find us on all the podcatchers once I get around to, actually being a decent person and getting these up in audio. I've just, it's a lot going on. It's hard to do, but they're all on YouTube for people who want to see our faces and see how unkempt my beard is from time to time. It's just getting outrageous right now. And you can watch us argue on plenty of topics, and I'm sure plenty more, because there's always something to argue about. And whenever we go, oh, I don't know if we have that much to say on the insurrection, we go like an hour and a half. So I hope you guys enjoy. And signing off, it's Matt and Matt.